How do you know if your students are on track to meeting the goals you've set for them? This is the reason educators give an interim assessment. It's a way to check student growth toward a predetermined goal. Interim assessments are different from the formative processes used during instruction to help figure out what's next, and they're different from the summative testing events that are held after instruction stops to look back on how learning went. It turns out interim assessment is incredibly varied. Checking on student growth can be anything from a writing prompt that Ms. G gives her class 2 times a year, to a quarterly standardized assessment that some districts might choose to buy from a vendor. Because everyone wants a picture of student growth, and in so many different areas. It can be challenging for schools to know how often and when to administer this type of assessment. At the core, interim data uses multiple data points to monitor student growth, allowing educators to identify patterns in student learning. What interim data is most useful for is informing your SLO process and making decisions about grouping, pacing, enrichment, and remediation. These decisions should guide instruction and intervention decisions. So what should interim assessment look like? The answer depends on how the data is going to be used. Here's Ms. G, pausing her instruction to give Andre and his classmates a writing prompt. She wants to know her students' progress in understanding how to write for different audiences, which was part of her SLO goal. The students' responses demonstrate what they've learned so far, so Ms. G can make instructional decisions. So she's using the data in a formative way, but she's also using the data to measure how students are progressing compared to a benchmark she set in her SLO goal. When a whole grade level takes a benchmark test written by Ms. G and her colleagues, the teachers and students are again pausing instruction to benchmark their progress. This time they're looking at students' rate of progress toward grade level standards and expectations in mathematics. Prior to the interim assessment, Ms. G and her colleagues have identified the purpose of this assessment and how they will use the data. This is the critical first step of any assessment process. Interim assessment relies on multiple data points to reveal trends and patterns in student performance. Because interim data can be aggregated, Ms. G and her colleagues can look for patterns. Are all of our students growing at a sufficient rate? What do the trend lines say? Where are the gaps? Ms. G and her colleagues can then check on growth. They can measure progress when they administer the same assessment at another point later in the year. Standardized interim assessments purchased from a vendor can help check whether students are meeting benchmarks on the way to summative goals, and generally in less than an hour. If they're used, it should be no more than 1 to 3 times per year. More than that won't help students. Interim assessment can be driven by a single educator, a team of educators like a grade level or department, or it can be led by the school or the district. In any form, interim assessments measure progress against benchmarks. And no matter what, educators need to be cautious that the interim assessments they choose to administer are high quality, are not duplicative of other testing, and not used in isolation for high-stakes decision-making. And also, for each interim assessment, what's measured has to be consistent each time it's given, otherwise you won't get comparable data. And whatever interim tool educators are using, the purpose of the assessment and how the data will be used should be clearly identified. These are the critical steps to implementing a strategic assessment system, one that coherently and purposefully uses assessment information to directly impact student achievement. Learn more about interim assessments and how to use them strategically in support of every child a graduate, college, and career ready at our Strategic Assessment webpage.